left and right.
Hey there, BookTube Noah. Everyone who reads and must converse is the channel. Hey, Una.
What's up, Noah? Thanks for having me on here, bud.
And not just hey, Una. It's like Una from the Codex Cantina in the house. Cheers, brother.
We have been at this for how long now? Like, I want to say it's been almost
Over
2
2
years.
years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Una and I have started at the same time, and we are, around the same time. And I've seen you blow up, brother. Your channel's great. It's awesome. There's nobody that follows me that doesn't know you, but if so, I'm still, gonna put the little link in the description box for sure. And Una and I have buddy read an amazing book. It's Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. I mean, right now, I was telling Una beforehand that this wasn't in my top five, powerful works, perfect books kind of thing. Because Una released some content earlier today, just a video on Pedro Paramo. It's fantastic when you have an extra 45 minutes. Just listen to him rap about this awesome book. But we're going to spend probably a little longer and try to get deeper. So his is first, this is second. If you haven't read it, what an amazing book this is, right?
You save the best for last, and that's that interactive conversation. I did some research like out on podcasts, like what's out on YouTube. There's not a lot of discussion about the
Right.
book, right? It's the
Right.
review. There's nothing wrong with the reviews. And this book needs those reviews to get people to be like, yo, I want to check out amazing literature like this. And
Right.
if we haven't conveyed that already, you need to read this book.
You need to read it.
But once you
124
read it,
pages.
once you read
124
it,
pages. So I
that's what
told
this is
Una
for.
that off of a second read now, this is definitely a book I'd recommend to anybody, but want to talk with them about, or especially if they're of Latin American heritage, Mexican heritage more
Mhm.
pointedly, I'd want to hear their thoughts because it's a very steeped in the culture in which it was written. Um,
Mhm.
awesome. How do you think we should start off talking about this weird? I call it Lynchian because it's freaking weird, right? But it is essentially like a dark ghost story, and um, it's fun in a way because it has some kind of experimental quality. It seems like it came from a singular mind, a singular thing, and Ron Rolfo also has this kind of mystery around him, right?
Yeah.
But how to approach a work like this if we're gonna talk about, you know, uh, uh, start with the narrator, start with what is Kamala, the setting that we're doing.
Let's even just start with what is this book in general, right? Because you look at certain landmark literature that is just stayed in the general publication order of people still purchasing it, of people
Yeah,
still wanting to read it and share it.
on lists, on all the lists of
This is the number one for if you're like, hey, what's the top novel to read from Mexico? At least most of the lists that I read have this listed on there somewhere, right?
right.
So there's something about this book, regardless of the feelings, regardless of it, that has really just captured the hearts of something to do with with the spirit. And to me, when I read this, it gave me all of these flashbacks to what I consider the American equivalent of that with Absalom Absalom, of just kind of telling a story of characters that reflect a bigger thing on here's how our culture came to be. Here's some things to think about. And here's some things that might explain things that you're unfamiliar with. And this is one of those books that I feel like you can look at and break out 3, 4, 5 different ways, and they all just make sense. Like it's just that complex and layered of a
Yeah,
story.
yeah. You drew a lot of great parallels with Faulkner in your video, and I think it's very apt. This is definitely a Gothic style novel if you want to kind of try to fit in. Of course, Gothic style is going to own the lion's share of any ghost story genre kind of thing, right? But when it comes down to it, it's a very character driven piece. It's small, a very character driven piece, and then setting driven. It's atmospheric. So this kind of setting driven, atmospheric, character driven Faulkner it fits right there. I wonder how much the translator of this plays a part in what it is. We have very little Rulfo to compare it against, but I'm
Mhm.
definitely down to jump in the short stories as well.
No, we need to do the short stories.
So as far as the setting first, then, because I mean it's very setting driven. It's atmospheric. Kamala is a dust bowl, a wasteland when we first see it, and these vignettes, because there's a lot of, you talked about the narrative structure as well, how these different different narrative voices come through all the time in
Mhm.
this. It seems like you're listening to a community. You're listening to the town of Kamala itself. But when we meet it, it's a wasteland. And so there's these little like vignettes that break through a lot of times in the narrative. And it reminded me of the movie Gladiator,
Mm.
where he's like remembering his family and the fields, and these kind of images wash through in the midst of this darkness and this horrific setting. Um and Kamala, I guess it's kind of like that because we're switching from present day Kamala with our narrator to the past as well, when it was more lush and vibrant. But the differences, the stages, what do you think? I mean, anything to say about the setting and atmosphere as well on that? Let's.
I would say, it kind of also gives you a little bit of like that Greek feeling where a character is in a current place and they need to go somewhere. In this story, in the opening pages, you need to find out about your father, aka you need to find out about your
It's like a
past.
little quest. And
It's exactly.
you didn't say this, but I want to kind of keep it in maybe in the front of our minds while we're talking right here. His mom gives him the commission to make him pay,
Mm,
right?
mm,
He
yeah.
says, make him pay
Mhm.
for what? For getting them, for not caring about them, like, but that's what spurs the little quest here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, this was pointed out by Starscream. We've talked about how he's another friend that's read this with us. He's got a wealth of background on the Greek culture, the Greek literature,
Amazing.
and he talks about how it's almost like you're entering hell, you're entering death, and the entrance into the town, you're literally descending into the town,
Right.
right? You're
Right.
entering the river Styx and you're paying a bundio, the coins to enter in the same way that you pay Charon to enter into Hades, basically. And I kind of view it as like this hero's quest in a sense, where you start and then where you end up might be the same place. Like there's kind of like this return at the end.
It's wild. It's wild. And there's so much depth and to this symbology and how this kind of plays. I'll say just like one kind of thing, because especially Abundio is this kind of thing. You're talking about money, right?
Mhm,
And he is at the beginning of the story and at the end of the story, and it is very cyclic and almost kind of a cycle of a story. Of course, Purgatory has this kind of feel to it, being stuck on the a wheel or whatever. And so that creates like a circle, which is also a coin, which is also what he's saying at the very end, that he needs money to bury his wife, over and over. So
mhm.
it comes back to like money, this kind of weird thing, materialist kind of stuff. And the, you know, the rocks is another thing, this kind of the real material there. But this kind of desolation, dryness, it says it's explicitly like you're on the a lip of hell, that
Mhm,
Kamala is right there on the lip of hell.
mhm,
So it's there. And we have that one character that says she doesn't believe in heaven at all, and she
mhm,
believes in purgatory and hell only. And that scene is framed as her in the coffin holding our narrator like a baby. And it's so weird, it's so crazy, these kind of images and things, and they just run through with a lot of power,
mhm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and there's small little element for 124 pages, it's gonna be really condensed, and there'll just be a single line where they'll be like, "She stopped looking up to the sky. She stopped looking up to the heavens," basically, like, she's given up on being able to stop paying in living in this living hell of hers.
Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned in your video, really very cool, that once he died, that's when we got that's when we get the narrator's name,
Mhm.
right?
That's
And
the first time I noticed it. I was like, "What the heck is
yeah,
this guy's name?"
and it's so weird that, like, why? But then that's he dies when he starts hearing the murmurs and the talk of the town and all this kind of thing. And so we're about halfway through the book, and the narrator dies. But it's not like a death that stops anything from happening. It actually expands the town into like another
Yeah,
level
yeah.
that you're now able to commune with all the ancestry and the past of the town, because he's hearing the voices of everyone.
That's true. Once you enter Hades, you're kind of liberated from the corporal limitations, right? Like,
Right.
I hadn't really thought about that. That's a really good point.
Yeah. And so, but the difference between these kind of things is what this book is all about, I think, in a big way. Because Pedro Paramo is earth and rocks.
Mhm.
And this kind of, you talked a lot of biblical themes really well on your video too. And to stick with the biblical theme, what is rocks? Well, it's rough earth that seed doesn't grow on. You know what I mean? It's this kind of thing that is barren, nothing grows, nothing whatever. And that brings me, it's a major point in this, that, Pedro Paramo can't love. He doesn't have a sense of community at all, and he can't love anybody. Um it might be able to be argued in some way that he loves Susanna, but we'll see. I want to work into that a little bit,
Okay.
but I think that the kind of desolation of what it is coming from this. He's so anti-community, and and so selfish, right? He's selfish
Yeah, because
ultimately.
I don't know enough about Juan Rulfo's writing. I wish I knew more after this
There's
book.
not much anything else,
We gotta go into those short stories.
right?
But I wonder what is his views of love in a sense, because I think a lot of us might define it as like that two-way street, right? Like it's about learning about others and connecting with others and
Right.
building something, not necessarily replacing yourself, but a bridge between two people. And that's the exact opposite that Pedro Paramo does. He pushes everyone to do the things that he wants. And even with Susanna, he's pushing her, but he couldn't even get to control her. And his inability to build that bridge, I think, is a beautiful metaphor to your point about being the rock and being unable to grow love in a sense.
He's constantly destroying people. I mean, everybody around him dies. This is the thing, where, like, his father dies on the
Yeah.
horse. There's a couple of cool things about the father's death. I think that the way that Ron Rolfo does the atmosphere of him dying and going into the mist and then coming back and going to that woman's house. So she saw the ghost, so she knew, like, beforehand. And so, and he had told her that he was lost in this mist, and how he does that was really cool, and just like really puts you there, and that this horse was mourning the loss. And then the
Maybe.
son, and you pointed out how anticlimactic the deaths are in this story, and it's great.
Mhm.
It's dry, it's wrung out,
Yeah.
it's completely barren of any kind of emotional quality. All the
Yeah.
deaths.
I
It's
I
like,
read
this happened.
I was watching a video of another YouTuber, and he said, we're not condemning anyone, but he's like, I didn't even notice that the narrator died. I read this
Right.
book, and I had no idea, and
They
I'm like,
play it so good. I mean, the first time I read that part multiple times. It's amazing. It's the most David Lynch style part of the book. That's why I call it Lynchian, because
mm,
it really does. That part right there makes me think of, Mulholland Drive, just the most creepiest, weirdest David Lynch stuff that there is. This surreality. And the community, though, what draws you to that couple that he's with when he dies, and the weird scene that it is, what draws you to it is the woman and the man's interactions with each other, when she's trying to wake him up, and he's like, Why are you waking me up? Just let me sleep. Well, you told me to wake you up. Well, just forget about it. Finally, just let me sleep. Just these kind of really human interactions. And then her being scared that, like, well, now that you're here, to our narrator, he's going to leave me because he's just been waiting for somebody to come to leave me. And it's like such a human self-confidence, lack of self-confidence kind of thing that everybody has felt and will feel.
Dude, I would never make it in Komala. Like,
No.
particularly all like the dead things, like, can you please stop talking to me like my dead ghost friend? Like, I really just want to be left alone right now. It just creeped me out.
It's crazy. The son dies in anticlimactic fashion. Everything happens like that, and it's just like there's nothing. Everything's dust that blows away in the air, dry dust.
Let me ask you this question. One of the big scary things about death is we have no idea what happens, right? Like we literally cannot tell what happens when we die. Well, here's a world where when someone dies, you can still interact with them. Like they can still share information with you, create memories with you in a sense. What would that change with our own fear of death, right? Would that make it less anticlimactic to the point of this book, where if you could just still interact with people that are dead, that it kind of makes it less of a thing to fear the way that we do in our world?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just like that, if that death is not the end of anything, that then you're just there. It alleviates a lot of the fear. It does. It alleviates a lot of the fear. No matter what, no matter how you frame that, no matter on what terms that kind of are, in what philosophy you might gravitate towards a kind of, energy after death that keeps on going, consciousness or
Here's an idea too. So if you're saying there's not as big of a deal because we're not as afraid, does that mean you're less concerned about committing sins and thus paying for them in the afterlife as a result? If there's not a big difference?
No. And the thing is because no matter what, in all belief systems, and this holds for Pedro Paramo just as well, I would say, is that there is a kind of law of karma. There is a cause and effect. There is a balance. There is a payment required for vices, wrongdoings.
The whole town's wiped out.
And it's just it's personal. It's so personal. It could be 3 lifetimes from now or something. If death is no end to anything, you know what I mean? Something like that. So ultimately you're going to pay. And learning that and like growing from that is something that that kind of thinking hopefully inspires, and that's where you go. But this book is like showing somebody who's completely alienated from any of that kind of thinking. Pedro Paramo is a completely materialistic person and selfish, only self-referential. He has no care for others. There's no sense of community with him, like I said. So but even the writing about him is so beautiful. Like you're always into it.
Is he the only character that doesn't have a scene where he's dead?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's the city. He is it. Our character, if we follow him, our narrator, he plays he goes to Kamala as a living person, and then we see him die of drowning in the square fountain at the center of the town. A fountain, I presume, at the center of the town.
Wait, who are we talking about?
The narrator.
Is that how Juan died? I know here the narrator.
Yeah, he dies. He dies by drowning, suffocation, in the center fountain of the town.
Okay.
Is how I take it. On a second read.
Dude, there were times I had no idea what was happening in the scene. Right. There's just like voices, and I'm like, what voice? And then you'll read 2 or 3 pages, and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. And then there'll just be one sentence at the end. You're like, oh, okay, that's who was talking.
Right.
Oh,
So
okay.
so here we are. We're at like the 20-minute mark. So now we're gonna go full on. I mean, we're gonna go full on. I'm gonna talk about it as if anybody who's watching from here on out has read the book, because you can't spoil a book that's old and this highly esteemed, right?
And this
Read it.
good. This good. You can't. You
But
can't.
behind this narrative, all the creepiness, all this wonderful writing, the beautiful prose, the atmospheric, oh, it's killing you. There's this narrative of a horrible, almost a crime boss that the community allows to take over their whole area and just kind of exert his will. And his son is a horrible person, just following in his footsteps, and they're horrible, like in a way, and
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. Not much redeeming factors, or none to their characters at all. And the town is just kind of along for the ride with this kind of thing and complicit in it. We'll get to maybe say some more about that in a minute, but then there's like this kind of love story behind it that doesn't really work out like a love story. It's so creepy and weird in and of itself. Susanna, this woman who he chooses, of course, to be his wife, and comes to his house and with her sister, and just becomes a bedridden, um, I mean, a mad woman, what somebody would consider crazy or mad, doesn't care about anything, just sleeps all day, maybe depressed. But ultimately, what it is that she's in love with her first husband
Mhm.
and has
Florencia.
lost her true love. And that's that for her. And Pedro Paramo is not going to satisfy that. She doesn't give a crap about Pedro Paramo.
Mm-mm.
Let her sleep and die. And so she does that. And Pedro Paramo is kind of heartbroken because he wants this, and it's like he can't get it. And he, is like this. But she shows him something. And this is a question I wanted to ask you. Um, if Susanna is this kind of like shows Pedro Paramo love, what love is, she's still in purgatory.
Mhm.
We're hearing that. Like, why
Mhm.
is she still in purgatory? This kind of love personification, and there's not much redeeming quality to this. It's bleak. So
Yeah.
why is the best that we can pull out of here maybe Susanna?
I think she's one of the few characters that like you were kind of I think you're rooting for Juan or not. Is it Juan? Yeah, Juan Preciado. You're
Yeah,
rooting for
the
him.
narrator.
Yeah, and you're rooting for Susanna in a sense. I so Tom, LA Books, right? He hasn't read this, but I reached out to him because I think he's pretty public about his, Catholic background. And I was kind of asking him about like, sin, because at one point, remember Renteria is going to sleep and he's like counting the saints, almost like instead of counting sheep, he's like counting saints,
Sure.
right? And I thought that was kind of interesting. So I had to ask Tom. I was like, Tom, do all people, like, because theoretically all people sin, all people create evil in some way. Do they all have to go to purgatory? And I don't want to put words into Tom's mouth, but he was kind of talking about like, well, it's kind of expected. Even the saints, even the priest, everyone who's human is probably going to have evil in their heart in some way or another. And even as pure as Susanna can kind of be, I guess, in a sense, she still has something to pay for there, is
As a
probably,
symbol. I
yeah.
mean, as a symbol, as pure as, just as a personification of love. But also, she's not inhuman.
Mm,
How she deals with her sister is so touching. And that's Ron Wolfo is perfect at these human relationships and just showing it in very succinct words and dialogue. I was reminded of Borges with how masterful it was with short sentences, or specific, using words with what he's trying to get across.
Have you read any of the background, how he had written a lot more and was like throwing out pages and just kind of just condensing it to the most minimal thing possible? He,
I can imagine.
where are
It
those
seems
pages?
right. I want those pages. I want them.
I want to know, like, are there short stories in his diaries that he wrote but was like too embarrassed or didn't want to release? I want those short stories, man. Like,
Right.
gosh, they're so good.
Right. So we've sold, or we've talked about like the ways that the narrative is Pedro Paramo is this like anti-emotional kind of thing, but it's like why does it work so well? Like with this, and I
Mhm.
was kicking that around this second read because it was such a joy. It's amazing. And I'm like, why does it work as well as it does? And I think that is because it's so subtle in the way that it plays the symbology of what it is using to build this for the reader. So check this out. Emotions are characterized by a river. Very easy. The river of emotions, this kind of thing that can get fast and carry you away, but
Okay.
also be calm and nice to sail on, all this kind of stuff, right? So, water and a river is real easy to, like, kind of emotions bring forth that kind of imagery, even on a subconscious level. And what this book does show is desolation and dryness in a way on a very human level.
Mm.
So as we can't help but just kind of like search for this kind of thing and feel parched emotionally, feel the desolate bleakness of this work, on an emotional level. And not to say that it's ultra high on an intellectual level evil either. The thing is it's very, very high on a human level. It's characters. It's character driven, and it's just awesome. And I think that the subtlety, that the symbology of that, how that's played, that's what makes it perfect for me. A perfect novel to show that kind of thing.
124 pages.
124 pages.
And think about all the things that it accomplishes, like the ability to compare it to the Greek epic journey, to compare it to the what causes this land to become wasted. What does sin mean? Like
Right.
I can't name another book that, it's to your point. Like I feel like the word simple might come out in some ways, but it's so layered. I don't want to say it's
Yeah.
complex, but it's
It's so layered.
so layered
It
that
is.
at any point, even if you don't catch anything, like who cares if you don't catch anything, right? But at
Right.
any point, you can just latch on to something. It's
Right.
really hard not to be like kind of engaged scene to scene. There's always something I'm like, oh, that's kind of
Right.
interesting, or
Yeah.
huh, what's going on here? Like I'm always interested.
Yeah.
Page 1 to page 124, I was like, my mind is just like, what's going to happen here? Like I was genuinely mystified, enthralled. Like there's some word there that this book just captured something
It's
in
definitely
me.
awesome in like in a very unique way. We didn't even talk about how much of an influence this was, because I'm sure you notice now after reading
Oh
this
yeah.
book
100 Years of
how
Solitude. Yeah, yeah,
right,
for sure.
how he used it in the form and structure of that novel. It's
Even
awesome,
from
isn't it?
even from the wedding night of the snake salesman, if you will, Orencio or whatever, saying, "Hey, you can't sleep with him that night." And I'm like, "Oh, well, remember that chastity belt in the
Right.
beginning of 100?" Like, there's so many things where I'm like,
Yeah.
"Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
You
He read it
dirty
twice
dog."
in one night. It can't help but influence you then. And also, it's this kind of thing where you remember being told something and then getting the story of that something, that and how it played out.
Right.
That happens over and over and over in 100 years of solitude, and flexed to a way, I think, that creates more of a spiral until it spirals down into destruction, desolation.
Mhm.
But Rolfo's is more of a circle that
Mm,
does
mm.
it, but the structure is that, you get these narratives with the narrator. You get these narrative pieces of him interacting with ghosts or with the town, really. And then we get like first person, or third person, just in the past with Pedro, and what happened with this town, this kind of thing, through the stories that the ghosts tell, is beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, let me ask you this. The first time you read this that was last year, is that correct?
What's that?
The first time you read this book, was it last year?
Yeah.
And was it after we read 100 Years of Solitude or before?
Yeah. But
Okay.
100 Years of Solitude was also a reread for me. So I
Right.
read 100 Years of Solitude twice before I read this one time.
So now it'd be really interesting for you to go back to 100 Years and then see, you know, just from a time perspective, how he pulled from it. Like, I know you've got it fresh in your mind, you remember it, but
Right.
now with like a different lens on it, it'd be really interesting to go back through 100 years and kind of see the comparisons. Because even me, having only read each of these just once, I was just like, oh, yep, I see where 100 Years got that now. Like
Right.
definitely took this and kind of took it and did his own thing with it, and it was really
Right.
cool.
There he goes. Rulfo inspired Faulkner.
Oh yeah. Oh, it was
And
like
Faulkner inspired Rolfo inspired Marquez. Marquez inspired and Faulkner inspired Rolfo, of
I
course.
didn't
So,
I didn't know this, but
Faulkner inspired Marquez.
I didn't know this, but Faulkner had like a huge following in Latin America at one point.
Sure. Well,
And
Borges translated one of his short stories.
how do you translate Faulkner is my
Right.
question, right? Maybe that's the same thing people are
He-
saying about these books. I don't know.
About Lispector, about this, about Borges, about Obscene Madame D, about, how do you translate these kind of, you know what I mean? It's a whole different language. And people would say, especially like, look at some experimental literature in English, House of Leaves, for example. How do you translate
Mm,
that? Right?
mhm, mhm,
Something crazy. So, it's the translator's problem. That's why I want to kind of maybe I wonder how much props you give to the narrator for this, rather than where you say Ron Rolfo, 20 times, but we never say Margaret Sayers Pendon, who is a
mhm,
wonderful Spanish translator, done a lot of translations of things that I have.
mhm.
Um, it's just great. It's awesome. I wonder how many translations have been done if they put them up against each other. I don't know. I
Mhm.
did read this with Yasmin first time. It's fantastic to read Spanish language literature with her.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
you just get it. Come
Yeah.
on.
To your point earlier about Starscream, I was about page, I don't know, maybe he'll remember.
It's
It's in our text.
divine
It was like
reading with Starscream.
it was like 15 or page 18. I reached out to him and I'm like, hey, you got to read this book, man.
Oh yeah.
Like I won't tell. Do you want me to tell you why? He's like, no, just let me do it. So he just
Yeah.
started it, and I'm like, you're gonna see it, you're gonna see it.
Yeah.
And he's a huge Faulkner fan, the same way that I
Nice.
am.
Yeah.
And you can see how these authors will take motifs, ideas, like we're expanding what narrative can achieve.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Before it was always just here's the narrator, this is how the story is told.
Right.
And here, Juan Rulfo's just like, I don't even need to describe who's narrating the scene. There's just voices in a room, and you're gonna like it.
Yeah.
Like,
Humans are narrating it.
yeah, someone who's dead is telling you this story, and you will like it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I do.
I
This
do
is
like
really
it.
good.
Yes.
The freakiest moment though was when they heard Susanna talking from the coffin, and they described like her inside the coffin, and I'm just like, okay, I'm getting kind of creeped out now.
Oh yeah. And I mean, I wonder how much, there's a lot of culture behind this, but like, when they describe, oh, it started raining, so that makes you know, all the coffins stir. So, we're going to hear sounds. Don't worry about it just is what
Mhm,
it is. And it's like,
mhm.
this is super creepy, man.
Is that George Romero, the when hell is full, the dead will walk the earth again, or what is that quote from? Is that Day of the Dead? It made me think of that line, like when it
Yeah.
starts to rain, the dead just rise. Like I'm like, oh gosh.
Right. Right. There's so much of that. And, the influence has been, washed over all kinds of literature, and not just Latin American literature or South American or Central American, or, but American literature and world literature too, as well. Um, it's beautiful to come in contact with stuff like this. Let's plan on doing some future content on Juan Rolfo. I'd love to get into his short stories.
No, I need to get into the short stories. This writing, I think it's come through. I don't think there's going to be a more favorite book than this year.
Nice.
I don't think it's going to happen. I loved this book that much.
It's really great. You know, it's a testament to a great book for me that I reread it within a year
Yeah, so
for sure.
fast. So fast.
But it's so short. So do it, y'all. If you haven't read it, nobody's watching that hasn't read it yet. But reread it. Is there anything else you want to say, Una, before we bust out?
All right.
Any other aspect of
All
the
right.
story or things you want to bring up?
All right.
Let's do it.
Here's my last question to you. You're celebrating, let's imagine like you're getting remarried to your wife again. Which character are you inviting to the wedding? Definitely not Pedro Paramo, right?
No. No. He might appropriate the, bride and all the bridesmaids or something.
Oh, gosh.
It's ridiculous, this book. I mean, it's it's dark. But no, who would I invite to the celebration? Probably the narrator, because I'd just say,
On. Yeah.
come on,
Dude,
and
I'm bringing
have some fun.
Abundio, buddy.
He's
Abundio
he's
was
somebody who it's wild how, he just shows that innocence, that just by virtue of being born, you can just get a very a bad lot in life, and it's okay. It happens sometimes, this kind of thing, I guess, because our narrator is a child or a young man. You don't learn, he's not a very developed character, one of the lesser developed characters of the book.
yeah.
And it's like you see him die, and you see him start his, long time in a purgatory situation. It's weird.
I felt so sad when I look back on Juan because I was kind of like, what
Yeah.
happened to him? Because he got
Yeah.
lost in the narrative and the
He
evil.
gets lost in the community of the town. He becomes Kamala, part of Kamala, in some kind of ways. And it's like Kamala is Don Pedro Paramo, who is now pure desolation, rocks, and like Kamala's totally nothing. So, the only urging, there's so much urging through the book too, not a lot, but enough to mention, of pray for me, keep me in your mind, pray for me. This is going to be the only kind of salvation that I can have now, is for y'all to just well wish me, right? Because it sucks here.
It's
And
it's reverse Stephen King. You don't want to forget them, otherwise they all float away, right? Like,
right.
it's reverse it.
Right. And so something like that, pointedly, I think, might be, there might be a whole lot of cultural aspect to that. Ancestral worship, ancestral acknowledgement, that I don't have. I don't really know, the depth of it, and to let it inform my experience of the book. But I love it nonetheless.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go call my grandma as soon as this chat's over. How you doing,
Right.
Grandma? I'm gonna call I gotta see what's going on here.
I love you. Hey, glad to talk to you. Right.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you, Una.
Well, thank you for
This
having me
this
on. I
has been
appreciate
this
it.
has been Noah and Una on Pedro Paramo. Jesus, what a book! What a book! Thank you for buddy reading it with me, brother.
Thank you for the invite. This was great.
All right, y'all. Have a good night. Bye, BookTube.